Educational Information and Communication Technology presents Educational Satellite Television Programs.
Hello, teacher. Hello, students. Welcome to our first lesson on genetics. In this unit, we are going to study the concept of genetic crosses, molecular genetics, the basics of protein synthesis, and what is meant by the term mutation. We will begin by determining the outcomes of monohybrid crosses and explaining the different types of dominance. Are you ready? A gene is a section of DNA and therefore a section of a chromosome that determines a particular feature. Humans have many genetic traits that are inherited through single genes, including dimples, the shape of our thumbs, and attached earlobes. The man on the left has the gene which calls for unattached earlobes. The man on the right has the gene for fully attached earlobes. Since each man has a different version of the same gene, we say that they have different alleles. Each one of you, students, gets 50% of your genes from your mother and 50% from your father. Each of your cells contains 46 chromosomes, so you have 23 chromosomes from your mother and 23 from your father. When the two sets are combined, they form sets that are called homologous pairs. These homologous pairs have genes that control the same features in the same position, called the locus, which are located on the chromosome. However, the alleles might not be the same. In other words, the pairs might have different versions of the same gene. For example, here we see the loci of 3 genes on a pair of homologous chromosomes. Gene 1 has 2 alleles. They are P and P. Each chromosome has the dominant P allele, so we may say that the person to whom this gene belongs is homozygous for the dominant allele. The second gene has 2 alleles. However, both chromosomes have the recessive allele A, as opposed to a dominant allele, as in the first gene. The third gene has 2 alleles, but as you can see, one allele is dominant, while the other is recessive, B. Therefore, we can say that this person is heterozygous for this gene. The alleles of a given gene are very important. They determine an organism's genotype for a given feature. The result of the genotype is called the phenotype. For example, do you remember the two men that we studied earlier? They have different alleles for the gene that determines the shape of their ears. Therefore, their ears look a bit different, and we can say that they have a different phenotype for that feature. It is time for the first activity of the lesson, students. We have learned a number of new vocabulary words. Please match each term to its definition to make sure that we correctly understand the terminology of genetics.
Students, let's get ready. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.
Welcome back, students. Trade papers with your neighbor so you can mark each other's answers. The definition of heterozygous is number 1. The definition of genotype is number 3. The definition of chromosome is number 6. The definition of locus is number 5. The definition of homozygous is number 4. The definition of phenotype is number 2. You may trade back your papers now, students. If you missed any answers, be sure to review each term's definition in the textbook when we have finished today's lesson. If you know the genotypes of 2 parents, you can make predictions about the features they pass on to their offspring. For instance, tall parents are more likely to have a tall child. That makes sense. The simplest way to predict the inheritance of a trait in an organism is to make a monohybrid cross. This term refers to a genetic cross or breeding that relates to just one trait or feature. The first person to experiment with monohybrid crosses was an Austrian named Gregor Mendel. Through experiments with pea plants, he deduced the 2 following principles. Every trait in a monohybrid cross is determined by 2 heritable factors, which we now call genes. The genes may take different forms, which we call alleles. If the 2 alleles in a gene are different, one is dominant and the other is recessive. Dominant traits mask recessive traits. It is time for our second activity. Suppose that a man and a woman were to have a daughter. Both of the parents are heterozygous for unattached earlobes, meaning that each has a dominant gene for unattached earlobes and a recessive gene for attached earlobes. Would the child's earlobes be attached or unattached, or can we know? With a partner, consider this problem now.
Students, let's get ready. Begin. Time's up. Let's get back to our lesson.
Hello again, students. We can find our answer by drawing a table like this. The dominant gene is expressed by a capital E, and the recessive gene is expressed by a lowercase e. As you can see, there are 4 combinations of genes. However, since dominant genes mask the characteristics of recessive genes, we can see that only one of the 4 combinations will lead to the daughter having 2 pairs of the recessive gene that calls for attached earlobes. In other words, there is a 75% chance that she will have ears in the same shape as her mother and father. Today, we have introduced genetics and learned about dominance and monohybrid crosses. Until next lesson, thank you, teacher. Thank you, students.